Good morning, everybody. Welcome to round 848 of the Planning and Regulation Committee. It is 9:05 and we will commence today's meeting. We welcome, as always, our extensive gaggle of city officers next door. Good morning to you all, our wonderful support staff. Good morning to all committee members and non-committee members joining us today. And of course, a very good morning to Alicia and the executive team here today as well. We'll start with attendance and apologies. I have received an apology from Councillor Fowler this morning, so I will move that, and that's seconded by Councillor Gates. And I assume that's no issue, but just very quickly, all in favour of accepting that apology from Councillor Fowler? Accepted. I have no leave of absence requests. Confirmation the minutes of round 847. Do any councillors need to make any amendments to the minutes of round 847? In that case, Councillor Doherty, happy to move those minutes. And a seconder. Councillor O'Neill, all in favour. Minutes of round 847 are carried. Conflict of interest declarations, councillors. Is there any conflicts to be raised today? Set a new record where I don't have any to deal with. Councillor Gates, thank you very much. Moving down the list to the starred items. So I've had a request from Councillor Young to unstar 6.1 and a request to unstar 6.2. Councillor Martin, 6.3.
Chair.
Councillor Neal, 6.4. Do you wish to unstar 7.1? Good to see. Okay, so that leaves us with one item starred, which is 5.1, the Ford schedule. Someone happy to move 5.1? Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Young. All those in favour? It's one item dealt with. In that case, we will move on with the meeting. 6.1, officers, welcome. Just very quickly before we go to questions, can I just check with all councillors that everyone does have the supplementary item, which was 7.1? Just everyone has that? Very good. DJ, good morning. Officers, good morning. Councillor Young, did you need a presentation on this, or are you just seeking to go straight to questions?
Thanks, Chairman. I think a public presentation would be pretty valuable, if you don't mind.
Officers, thank you.
Okay, good morning. My name is Liz Bailey. I'm from the Environmental Planning team within the Environment, Heritage and Resilience Department, and I'm here today to talk about the City Plan Major Amendment, Environmental Mapping Codes and Associated Alignment, which is also known as the Environment Major Update. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide an update on the progress of the Environment Major Update and to seek endorsement to withdraw the amendment from State Interest Review to enable officers to focus on the background work for the new planning scheme. The amendment was originally endorsed for submission to the State in April 2023. We received a pause notice and request for further information from the State in July 2023, much of which focused on their concerns around the potential impact of the amendment on the state interest for housing supply and diversity. Following work to address the State's concerns, we responded to the request in February 2024 following Council endorsement, anticipating that the State Interest Review period would then recommence. The amendment has remained on pause with the State while they reviewed our response, and we have since received a second information request in April 2024. This second request has raised a number of matters, some of which related to the initial July 23 information request and some which related to entirely new concerns. So in considering how to progress the amendment in light of the recent state information requests, officers have identified a number of concerns. Firstly, a significant body of work would be required to address the most recent information request, and undertaking this work will take a considerable period of time. and significantly delay the amendment's progress, causing an overlap with the work already underway for the new planning scheme. The state government caretaker period will also prevent any decisions or action being taken by the state on the amendment, potentially causing further delays. The policy positions that are included in the current city plan and the amendment will require a new justification and background work in order to inform the new planning scheme in light of the current state government agenda regarding housing supply. This will significantly increase the team's workload in delivering the new planning scheme. The overlap with the amendment and the new planning scheme timeframes will significantly impact the team's ability to meet these timeframes. In consideration of these issues, it's proposed that the amendment be withdrawn from state interest review. All work will then cease on the amendment, enabling officers to be adequately resourced to undertake the necessary background work for the new planning scheme within the required timeframes. It's intended that the policy positions and background work that have formed the amendment are still fit for purpose and will be integral to informing the environmental provisions in the new planning scheme. We're confident that this proposed way forward represents the best option to progress the improvements proposed in the amendment while ensuring adequate resourcing for the new planning scheme work. Thanks for your time, and if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions? Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. I've tried to get my head around this. We've had this material come to us a couple of times in the past, and it seems of great travesty that we've got to take this action that's recommended. So I just wanted to get some clarification, because my understanding is our concern, or the state's concern originally, was interpreted as being trying to open things up for future urban development. But some of the material that I've seen in this appendix, attachment 1, I'm not sure if that's their whole agenda. Like, I'm looking at item 2 on page, attachment 6.1, attachment 1, and it's, what's that? Doesn't have a page number, it seems. Yes, it is, 21, thank you. The second item there, the action that the state requires is that we revise the OO to ensure that protection for habitat for state significant species is included in the strategic framework. That to me sounds like they want us to strengthen something rather than liberate for development.
Yeah, through the chair. So yes, I think with that first state interest review information request, there were various things, some of which were very easy to address. I think that's one of the ones which we were able to address and go, certainly we'll update that overall outcome to improve that protection. But it's the aspects of that information request which were around the housing supply state interest, which are required much bigger work to address and weren't things that were as straightforward. So we responded to that information request back in February, and I think attachment 2 is our response to that. So you can see, let me flick to the right page, and you can see our response to that particular one, which is on page 35.
Yeah.
So you can see there that, you know, so obviously the information request originally had 30 items. Some of them were quite small things like that, but it was their big concerns were around the impact of some of the amendment on housing supply and affordability across the city. So they're the sort of things which have required a lot of work to address, and they're the things which are ongoing concerns. But yeah, there was a variety of things that they raised, but yeah, not all of them were housing supply, but they're our challenging ones to address.
Thank you. I don't have another question, Chairman. Thanks.
Councillor Doran, question.
Thank you, Chair. So just for Councillor who hasn't been on the journey with the team so far, is there any delay, is there any effects to the city by this delay? Because there will be quite a significant time, I imagine, between inclusion in the new planning scheme to where we are today.
Through the chair. So I think we've kind of thought about the potential risks of that, and the current environmental provisions in the city plan are actually quite strong. Obviously we're proposing improvements, but I think we feel comfortable that retaining the current provisions as they are for the time that it will take to do the new planning scheme, we feel confident that's not going to have any detrimental impacts on the environment, and it'll give us the time to do a better job on that new planning scheme and get these improvements justified in light of the state government agenda. So we feel, I guess, more confident that they're going to go through in the new planning scheme and be accepted by the state.
Sorry, they turned me off. Just to clarify that, Chair. So the last request for information obviously is quite detailed as well. So upon cursory review, do you think there's any major stumbling blocks there between the state's position and the city's position?
Through the chair, yes. I think that's where we're at the moment. Some of those more recent information requests are requiring a holistic review of our critical corridor mapping, which is a biodiversity corridor through the city. Their concern being that particularly in residential zoned areas that they may impact housing supply. So they want us to open up that whole corridor again to review, which will require employment of a consultant. And I guess they're wanting us ultimately to refine that corridor to facilitate more housing development. But I think for us, we've also got an obligation to protect the environment in the city. So I think that's where the challenge is coming up, is trying to find that balance between facilitating housing supply but also protecting the environment. It's a tricky space.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. And I totally agree with what we're doing here, because I've been on this journey, and certainly through the Save Currumbin group, we certainly backed this to go through, and it's really disappointing that the state didn't do it. But with the state election coming up, I think that we're very wise just to wait and include it in our new city plan. As I said, it'll be disappointing news for some of the people who were hoping that actually that we'd really tighten our corridor rather than do anything else. So, but I think it's like our other amendment plan. We just can't keep throwing resources at it and not getting anywhere. Thanks.
Councillors, any other questions for officers? In that case, is there anyone wishing to move this item? Councillor Gates, a seconder. I'm happy. Councillor Doran's hands up first. Councillor Gates, did you wish to speak to it at all?
Well, yes, I just want to say the poor officers, I feel really sorry that we've arrived at this place. I mean, the first information request was responded to, and it's just unbelievable for this government to want to actually impact on our corridor in this way. The critical corridor needs to be protected. And as representatives, we've supported all the work that the officers have done to ensure that's the outcome. And here we are. It's not a good place. But anyway, I hope your work will not be wasted, and that it can all inform the planning scheme, and that we can get there more quickly than perhaps we might anticipate with the work that's been done in various amendments now that will hopefully inform our planning scheme.
Anyone wishing to speak against? I'd open the floor up. Councillor Young, wishing to speak in general.
I'll just speak about the matter rather than against or for necessarily. I agree with Councillor Gates. This is a really sad outcome. Thank you, Liz, for your presentation, and thanks to the officers for their work. I think it's fair to say that the state's initial response to us was a mixed bag of issues, but a lot of it was minutiae. You'd think surely they're not going to sit there and rewrite sentences that we've got in there just to please their own sense of wordplay. And I think we've demonstrated over a period of time, and again today, that we're serious about the protection of our environmental assets, because we want our city to be sustainable in the sense of having an ecology that's healthy, which provides the right framework for us as humans to live here in the most beautiful place in the world. And I think, unfortunately, you forgot to put onto your slides in the issues that might be presenting themselves in the near future, change of government, because I think that's going to be happening, and I think it's going to impact this body of work. Thanks, Chairman.
Councillor Doran, wishing to contribute?
Thank you, Chair. Echoing the sentiments of Councillor Gates, thank you and the team for the work that you've done so far. Disappointed of the money and time that's been wasted on this once again. Before my time, obviously amendment packages in the past, time and money again has been wasted, and I feel like it is too common at the moment, whereby the city does its homework and the state doesn't respond or do theirs, and we waste time and money for ratepayers, only to then see interventions in our planning scheme and our local government matters. So we need to protect the green behind the gold, and I thank officers for doing that, and I look forward to seeing this again included in the planning scheme, and hopefully the city doesn't waste any more money doing things that the state doesn't respond to. So.
Just very quickly, so I've had the benefit as chair of probably having several briefings on this matter over the last few months, and it's been interesting that not just in this correspondence from the state government, but in a lot of others, it's very clear that it's a state government with a lot of conflict in it between different departments, that even when you read these letters, you have one part of the state pushing a stronger agenda on environmental protection and then a different department pushing back against that. So until the state can resolve that internally and be coherent in what it wants local government to do, we're going to continue, not just us, but I think all local governments find ourselves in this position. While I don't disagree that a lot of time and effort has been wasted, I want to make sure that we look to the future and look to the positive, that there's a lot of great work in this that we're not dropping completely. We're just going to push on with it in the future. I would argue a big part of LGMS over the next 12 months too will help reinforce our position that it's not just this chamber that thinks protecting our environment is important. We are acting on behalf of the thoughts of our residents and our ratepayers, and that through LGMS, I believe we will collect a lot more data and a lot more information that will help back that position and should help us fight back and push back against the state government, whoever that may be in the future, that this is what our residents expect and that's what we're acting upon. And then finally, that it is about a new planning scheme. While disappointing to be delayed, the opportunity is that possibly in some additional work in this space and making sure that we have got it exactly lined up with other policy coming from the city, that we put ourselves in an excellent position that when it's time to present this back to a future state government, we don't give them hopefully any areas to push back on against. And that will be through better data, better evidence proving that this policy doesn't conflict with other ones, and hopefully a future state government choosing to adopt this along with a lot of other work. Councillor Gates, did you wish to close?
You can close.
We'll take that as the close then. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. Officers, thank you very much for the presentation today. Appreciate it. We will move on to item 6.2. We welcome Mr. Connery and his officers in for a short presentation before we get into some questions.
Good morning, councillors. My name's Amber Barrett. I'm the coordinator of city parking, but today I've recently been working on the dog off-leash area guideline review. So we have a presentation for you. So the purpose is to update the dog off-leash guidelines to provide direction for the establishment and operation of off-street, off-leash areas within the City of Gold Coast. We want to agree on principles for the provision of dog off-leash areas and an agreed criteria for the sitting and provision of supporting infrastructure. So the inputs and drivers for our dog off-leash areas and the networks is obviously the aligning with the Animal Management Cats and Dogs Act, the local law, the maintainable city assets, community feedback and increased dog ownership. Okay, the underlying principles are equitable access to off-leash areas across the region, protection of natural habitats and wildlife takes precedence over off-leash opportunities, manage the interests of the open space users to ensure that the provision of the off-leash areas does not detract from the use and enjoyment of any person that's using the area, minimise the potential for conflict amongst users of open space areas, and promote council expectations of users to contribute to the success of off-leash areas through responsible pet ownership and adherence to council local laws, state legislation and specific site rules also. Owners are responsible for their dogs and utilise the facilities at their own risk. So our current state is that we estimate over 140,000 dogs in our city, with only 68,000 currently registered. We have 154 dog off-leash areas. And obviously, as I've discussed, the objective is to create a network of dog off-leash areas that are accessible to a majority of dog owners in the city based on registration. We determine appropriate locations, and consultation is undertaken with asset custodians, councillors, city cleaning and the community. So in our considerations, we look at dog population density to ensure that we have minimal overlap of dog catchment areas. So in the case of high consideration of dog off-leash areas is 40% of residences own a dog, and the catchment area then is set at 2 kilometres in the guide. Low, under 40% of residents own a dog, and the catchment area is 4 kilometres, so we've reduced that from 6 to 4. Current and future use of open space, dog off-leash areas cannot be within 2 metres of a playground. That's in accordance with the local law. So the objective of providing development standards is to create consistency in the facilities available in dog off-leash areas, commensurate with the type, fenced or unfenced, and location. So we're looking at, you can see here, delineation, existing natural barriers or landscape features in unfenced areas. In fenced areas, we're looking at the height of the fence, the double-gated entries, self-closing, etc., and looking at black or galvanised fence options. Minimum size requirements, 2,000 square metres. As we move on, we've got signage to be located, so there's regulatory signage that is required and advisory signage that we will work with stakeholders and councillors to install. Ground cover is existing grass and sand. We have seating, minimum 2 standard bench seats or 1 per 1,000 metre square to a maximum of 4, which is what we discussed at the last. And in fenced areas, again, minimum of 2, 1 standard bench seats located within an enclosure of 1 per 750 metre square. Drinking water, minimum of 1 combination water bubbler adjacent to the area and external to the enclosure in a fenced location. Obviously, we look at the reasoning for the water bubbler adjacent and external to a fenced area, which is based on water pooling and erosion within a fenced area. We also look at having it external to allow all park users to have access without having to enter the fenced area to use the water bubbler. We have shade, existing and natural shade, so we're obviously looking to try and move to more tree landscaping, which is less costly to the city than having infrastructure installed, so our preference is shaded trees. Waste receptacles is 1 bin adjacent to the area in consultation with city cleaning and waste management, and 1 externally in a fenced area. Agility and play equipment is natural landscape or features in an unfenced area, and existing natural features or artificial agility equipment. Parking is looking at existing parking to be utilised. Stakeholders will also conduct a multi-criteria assessment based on the information that we've just gone through to consider proximity to existing playgrounds, distance to existing dollars, the type of park, natural shade, proximity to the road, ground conditions and accessibility to existing services and construction. Dispensers. So we're looking at minimising environmental impacts caused through concentration use of an area like high use areas on your foreshores, to make sure that we've got those facilities there for people to collect and clean up after their dogs. We obviously support the requirement under Local Law 12, which requires a person to carry a dog bag regardless of the dispenser, so it is a requirement. And we've inserted a dispenser guide within the dog off leash area guideline. So it is obviously to provide development standards to create consistency in the facilities available in off leash areas, commensurate with the type, fenced or unfenced, and locations. In our dog off leash areas, in our new areas, we'll seek endorsement from City Cleaning and Waste Management, and we'll look at the additional proximity to existing dispensers in the area. In high traffic locations, again, we'll endorse with stakeholders and make sure it's easily accessible for dog owners and it's not located within 50 metres of a dog prohibited area. It minimises environmental impact from additional waste generated, does not detract from the amenity of the area, and we consider the proximity to the existing dispensers. In residential and medium-low traffic locations, we will install in open space assets only, seek endorsement from City Cleaning and Waste Management, and additional considerations as proximity to existing dispensers. And making sure it's easily accessible for dog owners and minimises environmental impact. Okay, so application of appropriate guidelines for location. Current service schedule. If a dispenser is serviced at least weekly, it may remain. So we are looking at doing a review on the dispensers like we discussed in our previous committee. So we will come back to Council with a further agenda item on that. Signage, we have removed the extra signage relating to small or aged and elderly dogs, and at a minimum we will be looking at having the regulated signage, and as you can see on the screen here, it will the dog regulated zones and the dog off leash exercise areas. We're also currently doing a review on the content for signage in accordance with the changes to state legislation. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Questions? We'll go Councillor Martin and then Councillor Gates and Councillor Curtis and then Councillor Patterson. Sorry, Councillor Marshall.
No worries. Yes, thanks. Through you, Chair. Look, I probably had two questions. One was I see on page 83 at the top there, it just says if a dog off leash area is time restricted, this is to be displayed on the information sign. Obviously, this relates to my desire to have a off-lead dog beach, sort of on the border of Broadbeach, Mermaid. Are there areas, but in the moment in the city that are time restricted for off-leash? Yep. Yes.
Through the Chair, yes, there are other areas. I don't have a list with me right now, but yes, there are. Thank you.
By any chance, are they at a beach?
Oh, there we go. Through the Chair, Marine Parade, yes.
All right, fantastic. And then I guess, and knowing that I've spoken to you guys, and is that I'd just like to know, I guess, where we are with the possible beach trial and time-restricted beach trial at Mermaid Beach, just in relation to the fact that I guess the number one area to recreate in that area is the beach. That's where most people will walk, and it just seems logical that there'd be a chance to do that with an off-lead area.
Through the Chair, I might take that question, Councillor. That particular location is absolutely going to be considered in our next Animal Control Area Register process, which is kicking off first thing next year. As you'd be aware, that process does take a little bit of time, in particular to make sure we do that sufficient stakeholder engagement with all stakeholders in that particular area. So we'll definitely be looking at that particular location and then getting that stakeholder feedback across the board. I think that particular location, though, does have some challenges being in that beach vicinity, just in terms of balancing off the requirements of a dog off-leash area then with other beach users as well. But we'll definitely be looking into that in the new year.
Yeah, I guess, is there any options in terms of, and I guess it's another question, so I've got three now, have there been trials for off-lead dog areas previously before it became, a concrete thing for an area? Like, do you do a trial for an area which is unfenced, obviously?
Through the chair. Look, we have not, historically, no. We haven't. We have recently put in a temporary fencing area in Coomera Sports Park, just a slight amendment to the location due to the fact of an administrative change that was required. And obviously it was in the law that we had resolved to have a dog off leash area in there, so it wasn't going against the local law and the register itself. So historically, no, unless it's in the local law and the register, we wouldn't. We haven't done a trial before. No.
Yes. Sorry, and through you, Chair. So it is a local law thing that we can't do a trial. Is that sort of the stumbling block?
Through the chair, the local law prescribes the installation of a dog off leash area. It must be in the register for us to install a dog off leash area. So yes, that's correct.
Through the chair, just to add to that, so in terms of, I guess, the discussion around trial versus permanent, I think that could be an administrative component that we could discuss and decide upon. What Amber's referring to is obviously that legislative mechanism that we need in the register in order to fulfil the local law requirement. That's not to say that we couldn't put it in place as a trial within the register and then determine that, longer term stakeholder engagement aspects later on, then making a decision whether it's permanent or temporary.
All right. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chair. Through you, I just had a couple of questions. With the consultation, what's the time frame that we've settled on? Is it still only once per year that we're going to put forward for consultation any new or amended areas?
Through you, Chair. Councillor, I think in terms of the Animal Control Area Register process, at this stage, maintaining it on an annual basis, but that is primarily due to the length of time that particular process takes, and in particular with the stakeholder engagement aspect. That said, we are currently interacting with our partner branches within the organisation to look at, are there ways that process could be potentially shortened in the future? But that is currently an unanswered question.
And I didn't see it in these guidelines, but you'll recall, or you may not, because it was before your time in this role, but there was an issue once where an area was declared in Division 3, and then it took so long to get the infrastructure after it had been approved as a leash-free area that when it came time to put the infrastructure in and I advertised it, there were so many objections that the matter was reviewed. And at that time, it had been agreed that any future areas to be considered would have signage within that particular parkland or open space area indicating that it was being considered as a leash-free zone. And I just wondered if that's made the guidelines anywhere to ensure that that does happen so that the adjacent community is fully aware of the advertising of that area as a potential leash-free area.
Through you, Chair. Councillor, I'm not specifically aware of that particular instance, but I think the stakeholder engagement and the quality that we utilise to inform the ACAR process is really important, and that's something we're really going to be focusing in on early next year to make sure it's quite vast and actually gets the opinions of the community, all users, not just necessarily one single segment, not specifically in the guideline for this particular guideline, but that's certainly something we're going to be considering.
Well, it was agreed through council at the time that would be the case moving forward. So while we're discussing this, I thought it worthwhile to ensure that that has actually carried through with the transfer of departments across to the Planning and Regulation Directorate.
Okay. Councillor Gates, would you just mind quickly, Luke, could I just confirm, so what Councillor Gates is looking for and what you're suggesting is going to happen, it'll just happen in a different document. It's not really this one that would be under the Animal Control Register piece where we would expect to see what Councillor Gates is looking for reflected.
That's correct, Chair.
Yeah.
Can we just check that that's in? Thank you.
Absolutely.
The only other thing that I wanted to raise, we recently advertised the amendment to Highland Reserve leash-free, which was an approved leash-free area. And as part of the decision, which was yes to improve it and make it a little bigger, it's probably the most popular dog park I've ever seen. There's usually about 40 dogs there in the afternoon. But I've had so many objections to the water bowl and bubbler being located outside of the leashed area. I suggested, as was suggested to me, that there may be disputes between dogs over water, and that's been totally debunked by all of the people who use that area. And I was just wondering if there might be, even though these are only guidelines, if there might be a little flexibility to put one within an area where the community really wants to see that happen. So I was just hoping we could say either within or adjacent to. And I understand your reasoning with erosion and for the wider benefit, but the residents feel that they have to stop their dog playing, put the leash on, go outside of the leash-free area, and that it doesn't enhance the experience to have to do that when the dog formally, and in a lot of instances, can just gallop up and have a slurp of water and keep playing. So I was just hopeful that you might have that flexibility where the community especially wants it, to allow a bubbler or a bowl within the fenced area.
Through the chair, yes, we can obviously look at amending the wording here to be in consultation with councillors, obviously. We also need to make sure, look at the use of the park as well and see what other people are using it that may not feel so comfortable going in to gated areas to access the water, but I'm sure it's something that we can look at and incorporate the wording to be, and this is just a guideline, so it is something that we would consult with the councillors and stakeholders to make sure we came to a solution that everyone was happy with.
I would really appreciate that, because this one is also located where the cenotaph from the Tambourine Oxenford Road is being relocated to, and I just personally feel that in this particular instance it might be better for everyone if the bubbler were not in the parkland area where the cenotaph is, but within the leash-free area. So
Councillor Gates, while I respect the officer's response that there's flexibility already in this and that's just a guideline, there'll be consultation with councillors, I'd be more comfortable if there is specific wording changes on this particular issue, because you're not the only councillor to raise it. So Alicia is working on some words now that will be reflected in the final policy to make it very clear what the intent of committee and council is.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Did you have any other questions, Councillor Gates?
No, I'm happy with that.
Right. Councillor Curtis, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question of clarity for the guideline around the maximum of 4 bench seats with those parklands where we have a segregated enclosure within another fenced enclosure. Is that considered 2 enclosures and then technically you could have 8, or is the outer one take precedence and it's 4 combined?
Through the chair, I'm sorry, could you repeat
So
that?
we've got 2 segregate, 2 dog parks that are big dog parks with then a smaller one within it. Mm-hmm. So the criteria says that we can have a maximum of 4 bench seats within a dog off-leash area. Are they considered 2 different off-leash areas, or are they one?
Through the chair, there isn't a set decision on that process, to be honest, so I think we would have to look at it individually and decide what was appropriate. I think if we felt that we could fit up to 4 in each segregated fenced area, then we certainly would look at that.
Councillor Curtis, was that your last question? I had Councillor Patterson next and I'll come to Councillor Young.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. A couple of questions. First, just for clarity, on the playground matter, Just so that I understood, because I do have playgrounds within areas that are off leash where the playgrounds aren't fenced. So what is the requirement?
Through the chair, it's just that people stay 2 metres away with their dogs. So it's not, I think that it needs to be fenced. It's just that the law states, so we would have signs installed stating that dog off leash or dogs could not come within 2 metres of the playground area.
Okay. Well, I might take that one offline, but there is a little bit of friction at Harry Bond about that one. There might be a better way that we can manage that. Just also a note on the water bubbler. I think allowing dogs to drink when they want to probably is healthier for dogs as well, because then you can forget that they need the water. I was at one of my beautiful dog parks this morning, Sun Valley Dog Park, with my dog. It's a good place to go on a hot morning with beautiful trees. And I did get a strange comment from one of our residents who runs the dog Christmas party, who said, oh, well, based on the new laws, we will be able to have the dog Christmas party because they all get together and it's off leash, but it's kind of... So I just thought, well, I said, no, dog Christmas parties very much allowed to stay. I don't know whether that came out of the last committee meeting or where the news came. I'm going to find out where she got it from, but just making sure that our comms are good on this so we're not making people concerned where they don't need to be.
I can't think of something that's changed in this that would prohibit that. That would nearly be a local event being held in a park.
Yeah, I think that perhaps the concern was which is important, and I said, look, it's really important that when your dog's off the leash, you need to have control over that dog. I think it was something to do with that, but I'll find out, and if we can just make sure the comms are clear, because there's clearly something going on in the dog community about that. Thank you.
It's a tale of two ends of the city. I don't have the same problem with dog Christmas parties up my way. Funny. Was that the end of your questions, Councillor Patterson? Councillor Young and then Councillor Doran.
Thanks, Chairman. I note our desire to locate rubbish bins in close proximity to dog off-leash areas and where we have dispensers provided and that sort of stuff. I've got a park where the refuse people refuse to go to any further than 50 metres from the road, and so that means it's about another 50 metres to the dog park. So people just don't use the bin. They collect the feces and they just tie the bags to the fence and all that sort of behaviour. You know, it's humans, unfortunately, and I just have had no cut through whatsoever in getting that bin located closer to the dog park, to the dog off leash area. And I think that whilst these are guidelines, we need to be sure that our organisation is seeking to fulfil these objectives as well. So, you know, in this case, it's Waste Management who just will not budge because their contractor won't go that extra distance. And it really makes the whole thing very unpleasant and undesirable. So I wonder what kind of interaction there might be between your people, through your chair, through Luke's people and the waste people in trying to pursue and achieve these objectives.
Through you, Chair, I guess as the custodians of the guideline, I would see us taking a lead role in conducting that consultation with yourself and with the other areas within the administration to come to a satisfactory outcome. I would suggest where we've got behaviours where people are not using waste bins, then that's obviously not working, so we'll need to look at that, Councillor.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. It wasn't one of my questions, but I have exactly the same problem that Councillor Young has indicated. I know officers are nodding their head that they know that's a problem. And that's why in the guidelines on 5.3.2, when it talks around the dog bag dispenser criteria, there is in the first table there, seek endorsement for proposed location from city cleaning and waste management to ensure serviceability, but we don't have any context as to what criteria they are going to measure their endorsement against in this guideline. So it seems to me like that could just render every other criteria mute, and we don't know why the city cleaning or the waste management are refusing in our case. I feel like that also should be contained within the guidelines as to what they will measure endorsement or not.
Through you, Chair, Councillor. So I think that's a really good point to pick up, and we can absolutely interact with those two business areas to get that criteria and have it in place prior to Council, if that's appropriate.
Thank you.
Luke, if you're happy to take that as an undertaking to give that extra information for full Council,
absolutely,
would be excellent. It may require as well, so specifically on the waste management one, that would be a variation to the contract, like that. There's literally in the contract schedule a distance for the contractor to move away, which would be set at 50 metres. So if it's as simple as getting a cost back from our contractor to say, if they have to travel 100 metres, what's the value of that service? We may look at a GBI at Water and Waste Committee, Councillor Young, to force that point home, possibly, to assist Mr Connor in his work. Councillor Dora, any other questions?
Yes, sir. Page 78 talks around the core principles 4.1. One of them is promote council expectation of users to contribute to the success of the off-leash areas through responsible pet ownership and adherence to council laws. By complying with the guidelines, is that simply the one sign that says off-leash park and the guidelines, or is that an opportunity for council to over-communicate what's expected of users of a park?
Through you, Mr Chair. Councillor, just to clarify, we're talking specifically signage, so non-regulatory signage, is that?
How we're promoting council expectations, Luke.
So I think, through you, Chair, probably two methods that we're going to be doing that. One is going to be through our educational activities in general, which won't just be focused on dog off-leash areas. It'll be broader than that, but certainly dog off-leash areas will be an important component to that. And the second will be through signage in particular. We've got the regulatory signage, which will be really quite quite succinct, but there is opportunities which the guideline still does allow for additional information signage, but I think that needs to be on a division by division basis and probably a dog off leash area by dog off leash area basis.
So that can be in consultation with the local councillor, whereby there might be a need in a particular park for users of the park to be reinforced what their obligations are, because sometimes those signs are quite small and don't attract their attention. So that flexibility is available despite the guidelines and the signage that's within this guideline.
Through you, Mr Chair, absolutely.
Thank you. Just two more quick ones, Mr Chair. 5.6, just an explanation as to why we're removing the small dog section. I know Councillor Curtis and I both have dog parks that have, I'm going to use the wrong terminology, but large and small dog park sections. I'm just wondering why we're removing that under 5.6.
Through the Chair. Those signs, we have no plan to remove them from the locations that you have. It's just that it was decided at last workshop that we didn't need to include them in the guideline, but certainly something in consultation with divisional councillors that we can continue to install if need be.
So I remember the workshop, Mr Chair, but I don't recall removing any signage from that. I probably will be wrong. I'll take your expertise over my memory, but I still feel as if, do you think that we still capture the ability to sign small dog park, large dog park in areas where we do have problems between the two in the guidelines if we remove that section altogether?
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor, I believe so. That was the discussion, was that whilst we remove that signage-specific aspect out of the previous guideline, the ability to interact and install and or keep additional informational signage still exists.
I just don't want to get to the point where we pass a guideline and then we want some put in and we get told it's not part of the guideline. So if you're comfortable that we still can, Chair, I'll move on to my last question. If an existing park does not have the basic amenities outlined within this guideline, such as a bin or seats or a dog bag dispenser, will the city go into those parks now as a result of the new guidelines and install them, or will that be on a case-by-case basis? If we've identified a need, for example, of 2 park seats in a 1,000 square metre enclosure and they're not there now, will you embellish those parks in accordance with those guidelines?
Through you, Mr Chair, I think
intervention there.
Councillor, I think we'll be looking at that on a case-by-case basis. So where there's a significant issue or we've got significant new information that there's different needs for that specific location, we'll absolutely interact with you and happy to look at that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillors, any other questions for officers? Luke, just to pick up on Councillor Marshall's line of questioning, so I wasn't aware that we had any timed off-leash areas existing, but have detected that Councillor Marshall's got a particular interest in one that is a fairly prominent area in the city. If there was an interest in seeing that trial occur, especially since we had that bit of a discussion about if a trial can occur outside of the local law with the exact register, would it be helpful for a change of the recommendation to have a future paper brought forward to outline the options for that trial so that it's then a resolution of council if we choose to proceed with it?
Chair, we might be able to actually capture that in the ACAR 2025 item that's already scheduled for this committee. We, alternatively, if it's easier to do it as a separate item, we can do that as well.
So, and I should have looked at the forward schedule of the check, but when is ACAR? When is that due? Must be the next couple of rounds, is it?
It's not due till June, and that's the end product, Chair, in terms of the end product of all the consultation. So there will be a process kicking off first thing next year where we'll be going and interacting with councillors on a one-to-one basis to identify specific areas to then do the consultation around.
So I'm happy for now for that to be offline to have that discussion, but like I am particularly interested. That's a prominent area, and I've heard from others about that area as well. If there is an option for a 6-month trial in 2025 so that we can test it and work out if it is going to work or not, I think would be a good outcome. So perhaps if I could leave that as an action for you to continue the discussion with Councillor Marshall to get us towards a point of a trial next year and what that looks like.
Will do, Chair.
Councillors, someone prepared to move the change recommendation? Councillor Young, seconded Councillor Gates. Councillor Young, do you wish to speak to it at all?
I hadn't prepared to, but obviously dogs are a really important part of our community, and people love taking them to dog parks and enjoying seeing their dogs recreating with other dogs, and I think the council's got an appropriate response to that and the provision of off-leash areas across the city, and we're trying to ensure that they will reach a certain standard as a minimum and that we properly provide facilities within them to support the best utilisation. But ultimately it's really up to the owners of the dogs to take responsibility and help us keep these facilities clean and in a really good condition and safe for the rest of the community. Thanks, Chair.
Anyone wish to speak against? You have a suggestion in the amendment?
I thought that we were going to capture the guidelines for waste and city cleaning to be included in the guidelines. Does that
No, so that's an action that Luke will bring that information to us before full council.
And then not going to be included in the guidelines?
If need be, we can include it in full council, but they don't have that information to give us right now.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So this is very specific. Change the water bubblers today, which will be included in the guidelines. Information on the waste and dog bag dispenser side of things as additional information to be added at full council possibly will come to us as quickly as we can. We've got a couple of weeks, so we've got plenty of time. Anyone wish to speak against? In that case, I'm going to take that as a close as well. Councillor Young, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Officers, thank you very much as always. Yep. We will move on to item 6.3. Trina Catherine Jordana, good morning. Councillors, if you wouldn't mind, just Councillor Patterson's at the duck outside quickly. We might just adjourn for a couple of minutes to allow her to come back before we kick off because it's important committee members hear all this stuff. So we will adjourn for 5 minutes. Welcome back. We'll recommence at 10:05 and we'll go straight into the presentation for officers.
Good morning, councillors. I'm going to be presenting this month's program update on the planning scheme program. You'll remember that we have two work streams in the planning scheme program, the first one being the planning scheme itself and the second being the local growth management strategy. Under the new planning scheme work stream, just a few points to note. The work packages have remained the same, so I won't go through those in detail. Those are all progressing, and I think Jordana has met with some of you already to discuss some of those activities. The planning scheme advisory group, who we've talked about previously, the pre-meeting was held last week with some of the members where we discussed the terms of reference and potential additions to membership. We'll be looking to meet with that group again shortly. Under the local growth management strategy, I thought it might be useful to talk about some of the community consultation events we've got happening in October. There are quite a few, so I might just skip through to some of these slides just to let you know. So on the 1st of October, we launched the citywide survey, so that's gone out to the whole of the community via Gold Coast Have Your Say. Just before that, we have the community research survey that went out to 500 recruited residents. So those are residents which are represented geographically and demographically. At last count, I think we're upwards of 500, 400 of those 500 have completed that survey. So we're hoping to get that results of that reasonably quickly. We also, on Friday, sent a shortened version of the survey to city staff members, so that went out in the CEO update. And today we will be sending that survey out to yourselves for completion as well. So that's the same version that went out to city staff, just with a couple of additional questions about your community and your divisions. This Thursday, we've got a young people Vision for Change workshop. That's a 2-hour session with the members of the city's Junior Youth Council and Youth Program. In that session, they'll be talking about the local growth management strategy in general, so just bringing them up to speed with what the intent of that non-statutory planning instrument is. They'll also be exploring challenges and opportunities of growth like housing diversity, urban greening, etc. And the idea is that they will present back the outcomes of that session on Thursday to their Youth Council meeting on the 23rd of October. The community advocacy groups and the special interest groups, I just wanted to say thank you for those of you that have reviewed those and provided some additional names of groups to add into that cohort. The intention is that the community advocacy groups will be a one-on-one discussion, some of those in person or otherwise online. They were intended to go out this week, but invitations will be going out today or tomorrow for the following week. So we'll be expecting to speak to them next week. The special interest group workshops will be held at the end of the month, so the 22nd to the 25th of October, and those are a bit longer. They're about 1.5 hour workshops. They'll be facilitated by our partner Civic Shifts along with city officers, and we'll be running a number of them. So 6 to 8 of those will be happening at Hotter over 2 days, 3 days, depending on how much feedback we get in response to the invitations. Apart from that, we're planning a number of events with the community as a whole. So when people are completing the survey, they have an option to click or register their interest for attending a Vision for Change workshop, which we're planning in the last week of October, first week of November. Those will be held in 5 different areas across the city. So hoping that we can get sort of representation across the whole city. And those are a 2-hour workshop with a very similar theme to the other workshops, where we'll be trying to educate people a little bit on what the LGMS is, but also just trying to look at what opportunities that community might see in terms of growth and change, and particularly looking around housing diversity and urban green and climate responsive planning, that kind of thing. At the same time that we're doing all of these initiatives, we're also developing an education program, which is a number of videos and other education type opportunities. 2 of those videos at the moment are available online, and when people do the survey, they'll be able to click on those, and that just talks a little bit about what growth might look like in the city. The idea is that we will hopefully be coming back in November with, if not all the results of the research, a significant part of those results, which we will bring back and share with you. And that will inform our next steps in terms of a report that will come back to the council, which will be a vision of change report.
Trina, do you mind, just while we're on this page, Councillor O'Neill has a question about the workshops.
Sure. Thanks, Chair. The workshop locations, it seems like the furthest south is Robina that you're holding these workshops. Is there any intention to hold one further south?
There is. Do we know the furthest?
Through the Chair, in relation to the workshop locations, we have looked for city venues that are capable of holding a significant amount. The venues we've chosen to date are based on venue capacity. We can look at other venues if we need to, in terms of like surf clubs or something like that. It really was determined by the capacity of the venues.
Yeah, that would be appreciated, because don't know if you've ever travelled from south to north at the moment, but it's pretty restricted on both the M1 and the Gold Coast Highway as well.
So, Catherine, Alicia, there must be a workshop further south than Robina. So, wherever it has to be, council or non-council venue, a workshop further south, a couple of them, in fact, I think would be good. I'm guessing there'd be no disagreements with that, Councillor Martin. Very good. Can we have those as a follow-up action of a response back of where those will be and when they will be for councillors? If you don't mind, I'll just let Trina finish and then we'll come back to questions. It was just very specific from Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Chair. That actually concludes my presentation.
In that case, Councillor Wilkinson, to your question, and then to Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I appreciate that I'm not on this committee, but I just, similar line of questioning, I guess, to Councillor O'Neill, just in relation to those community ones, I can see from what I'm looking at here, there looks to be one that's potentially online. Is that correct? Just in relation to that, because I had similar concerns that Councillor O'Neill shared about making sure that my community had opportunity to get to those particular locations. With the online one, I note that obviously we've got a capping for physical attendance to these other locations, but will the online one be basically a free-for-all? Can anyone get on, as far as, do we have a capacity bandwidth for that? Just out of curiosity.
Through the Chair, there will be a maximum capacity. I'd have to go back to the team to look at that. And that capacity is more about making sure it's a workable workshop, so that we have participants that can have their say and also have the opportunity for everyone else to have that say. But I will come back with that information as well.
Catherine, can I check? So I think we have one of those in the program at the moment. If we had a significant interest in the online version, do we have capacity to add more in if we want to?
To you, Mr. Chair, yes, absolutely.
Yep. Was that your question, Councillor Wilkinson?
It was, Chair, and I appreciate that. And again, I know that we're still looking at those final potential locations. That's why I just wanted to clarify, if there were to be that online one, where that would land. So I appreciate that.
So perhaps the greater action is that can we get some further advice on the physical locations these have been held at and a display of how it's across the city? Because nothing north of Nerang is probably not going to be the ultimate outcome either.
So through you, Mr. Chair, what we'll do is get a memo before council, we'll spread it, and then we'll also, if there's needed to be additional online workshops, we'll put that in there.
That's all right. And possibly it may be because I can understand that it would be community centres in the north are booked out months in advance, so finding a facility would have been difficult. It may be that if it can't be physical, that we have a specific online for the northern section. We'll find the right mix in there. Councillor Young, your question?
Is it possible to get a copy of this presentation, please?
It is.
So just dealing with this presentation only, about the youth interaction, my understanding is there's a meeting with the Student Council this Thursday at Nerang, and I think that's the only Nerang meeting listed. And that basically is going to form our impression of what the youth aspirations are for the growth of the city, the Junior Council. Plus whatever happens on the Gold Coast Have Your Say, randomly.
Through the chair, Councillor Young, what we're also going to task the Youth Council with is actually taking this back to their schools so that they complete or get their student cohort to complete the GC Have Your Say survey as well.
Right.
Once we've got the findings or initial findings from the research, part of that process will also to make sure that we've got a comprehensive view of the community. So if there's gaps in anything, we'll have to look at where we go back and get this additional information from.
Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. In the report around the new planning scheme workshop, it talks about the city planning is working around 20 policy areas, and I'm just wondering if officers or you could just provide a bit more colour around probably the key policy areas that you're working through.
Through the chair, we're working with all the internal policy owners, so that includes like Infrastructure Gold Coast, so the various branches, as well as EH&R. So when we look at that, there's approximately 20 to 22 policy areas, so it can include our beaches and waterways, transport, the environment team, waste. So it's a whole collection of our internal policy owners. We then also have all of the policy issues that our own city planning branch is working through, so they're not encapsulated in that 20 policy areas that we've talked about in the presentation.
Thank you. And just note on the other point around that a review of policy and provisions which inform previous amendments is underway and a strategy is sort of being developed. So just looking for comfort for my community that obviously amendments 2 and 3, we've got attachment B that weren't approved, but making sure that that's part of that review and is being worked into the new city planning scheme.
Through the chair, that's definitely part of our review. It's forming a separate program of work that we're looking at. We haven't worked out how we will be dealing with what was formerly 2 and 3 and A, B and C amendment packages, but we are definitely looking at what was captured through those amendments and how they will progress or won't progress through the new planning scheme.
Thank you.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the monthly updates or the updates every meeting on the new planning scheme. Chair, my question relates to how new information will be assessed and adopted in a new planning scheme. Recently, Robina had a ministerial direction which added 1,250 dwellings to our area. Will there be offsets on the density expectations for that community given the unexpected increase of 1,250 dwellings? By way of reduction in other areas, Councillor Young, or and if not, what sort of infrastructure assessment will be needed to be done to accommodate?
Through you, Chair, Councillor Doran, what we'll be looking at is the capacity of the infrastructure networks in managing our growth. So with an additional 1,200 dwellings, we'd have to look at, well, what can the network currently cater for? Is there an underutilisation of that infrastructure? What does any upgrades mean? We're looking to do that work mostly in the leading of the LGMS, so looking at how growth is managed across the city. Once we've got that from a settlement pattern sort of understanding for the city, we can then get into the more detail of building height, density, what that means for individual locations.
Thank you.
Councillor Young.
Just a question about the agenda item more broadly, Chairman. Last week, you recall, we had a workshop about our appetite for risk in the future, and I thought that we might be a bit more conservative in our risk appetite in regards to environmental protection. It was an opinion was voiced that that's going to be hard because all of the growth is going to be occurring west of the highway or west of the motorway, and therefore there'll be a lot of pressure on our environmental assets in the future, which has worried me a lot. And I just wondered if officers can corroborate that, if that's been a topic of discussion, that the majority of our future growth is going to be west of the motorway. Is that the game plan that we're looking at? Because if it is, we're going to be fighting.
Through the Chair, we have an urban footprint, so we have to contain our growth within our urban footprint at this point in time. At the moment, based on the stats that are in the regional plan with the state, a lot of our growth would be largely contained within the coastal corridor. We are now working through our local growth management strategy to work out where our growth is going to be best located, because we need to ensure that our growth works with the infrastructure that we have and the quality of life that we want to see on the coast. So that's the work that we'll be doing through the local growth management strategy. So at the moment, there is no plan that we're going to be pushing it out to the west or anything like that. We are working through that with the local growth management strategy.
Thanks for your response. If I can, Mr. Chairman, through you. You and I had a good discussion a couple of weeks ago. Thank you for that opportunity. And at that time, I did indicate my support for intensification of development in some rural locations in the form of villages, rather than the kind of sprawl that we've encouraged in the past with our rezoning and reconfiguration of rural lots, and so I'm not adverse to contemplation of appropriate development in rural areas, but what was put to me was that it's just going to be a pretty significant intensification west of the motorway. I take your position that that's not necessarily the case. Thanks, Chairman.
So, Councillor Young, my recollection of that conversation was it was actually the facilitator of that meeting, I think, was trying to prompt discussion. So I would like it on the public record and very clear that there is no policy position or intent looking at development west of the highway. I think it was the facilitator of that risk appetite meeting trying to stoke a conversation, just so we're very clear to anyone watching or has any concerns about development on the western side of the highway. Any other questions for officers? So I seek a mover for the new planning scheme program update. Councillor Young. Councillor O'Neill is happy to second.
Oh, Chairman, can I ask? Last month we were provided a summary position from the General Manager, which was pages and pages long, and that was the summary, and that was pretty frightening for a lot of community members that I tried to introduce the topic to. And I have no criticism because it is a really complicated body of work, but having that summary was really helpful, and it might be a worthy part of the program if we have these agenda items and then we get a one-pager that sort of can be readily shared with community groups about what our progress is. Is that possible?
So I think that's a very fair point, Councillor Young, and I'm going to guess that all councillors are getting similar feedback from their community members that they're looking for information they can easily digest, and if we can be cognizant of reports that are suitable for us as the elected wing to read and digest, but then a version that is easier to disseminate to the community that still provides them all the updates they need, whatever that looks like.
If you're comfortable, Mr. Chair, we could include that in the future reports. So the monthly reports that come to this committee, we could just do an attachment saying this is the page that you can use for your communities.
Can I, as an undertaking from all councillors, but for Alicia's team to create that, they're going to need our input to make sure, are we providing the right amount of information or too much or too little? So when the next one of those comes out, it would be really good if councillors could give that feedback early to officers, that summary that you want to give out to the community, does it have what you're looking for? Does it have too much, too little? Because waiting till committee then is a lost opportunity. Do you need to open, Councillor Young? You're happy to leave it at that? Yep. I've kind of already touched on a little bit, but just very quickly, while I'm happy, always happy to take questions for officers when they're here in committee, I think a few of the questions today would have served better if, when you get the committee papers, to have raised it with officers beforehand, especially around the items of future things being locked in for community meetings or where that stuff is happening, because some of this is already well underway. It's going to be in the next week or two. So especially with the LGMS stuff, you're getting regular updates outside of the committee papers, but between the two of them, please keep in constant contact with Jordana, Catherine, Trina, Alicia about any concerns you have as early as you can, because adjusting the program takes time and takes resource that we just, especially time-wise, don't have. Your input on where meetings should occur, there's not one far enough south, there's not one far enough north, we need another online one, is all excellent input, and I want it. Let's give it to the officers earlier than committee so they can action it, is all I would ask. We'll close with that and take the vote. All those in favour? Motion passed. Team, thank you very much. That takes us to our one and only DA for the day. Item 6.4. Roger. Good morning, sir. Man on a mission. Councillors, is there an interest in the short presentation on this item? So I wouldn't mind the presentation, because I know from the original application that submitters would have raised submissions against, there's been a lot of change. So I wouldn't mind the presentation, so we've got a public-facing record of what changes have occurred for anyone interested.
Good morning, councillors. Item 6.4 is for a material change of use for multiple dwellings, proposing 34 units at 239 to 241 Boundary Street in Coolangatta. The subject site consists of 2 allotments and is located on the corner of Ward Street and Boundary Street, with a combined site area of 810 square metres and a combined frontage of 58 metres. Now, the site can be seen in this photo taken from the southern side of Boundary Street. The site's located within the middle portion of the Rainbow Bay area, with the Coolangatta Major Centre being located to the west. The site is located within the high-density residential zone and has a code-accessible building height identified on the building height overlay map of 38 metres. The development proposes to establish 34 units within a tower form, providing a variety of 2, 3 and 4 bedroom units, resulting in a residential density of 1 bedroom per 9.4 square metres. The proposal includes 3 levels of basement parking, providing for 48 resident parking spaces, achieving compliance with city plan parking rates, and also contains 2 of the visitor car parking spaces, with the ground floor containing the remaining 4 visitor parking spaces, resulting in a compliance with the Transport Code. And the communal open space has been provided over 3 levels. On the ground floor, a pool and recreation deck is provided. An indoor gym and terrace is provided on the first floor, and on the rooftop, an outdoor dining area has been provided, with the remainder of the roof level providing private open space for the penthouse unit. The tower includes a varied floor plate, with the lower levels containing 3 units, levels 7 to 14 providing an increased setback to the adjoining properties and reducing to 2 units per floor, and the 15th level containing a single penthouse unit. A building height of 17 stories and 56.7 metres is proposed. The development exceeds the building height overlay map by 18.7 metres, representing an increase of 49.2%, which triggers the application to impact assessment and requires officers to have regard to specific outcome 3.3.2.19 of the urban neighbourhoods element of the strategic framework. Following the response to the information request, officers were unsupportive of the development, as it was not considered that an excellent standard of appearance had been provided. Following a further advice letter from officers, the applicant made a number of changes to the building form, which improved the standard of appearance. Most notably from this perspective, the applicant reorientated the balconies of the levels 7 and above to the corner which softens that corner, and which is the corner frontage to Ward Street and Boundary Street. At the rear of the development, which can be seen in these figures, the planters were included for the full height of the building, and the changes to the glazing can be clearly seen, which softens the overall built form. Overall, following these changes, officers considered that a built form had been proposed and now represented an excellent standard of appearance. Officers have also had regard to the established building height character of the local area. An analysis of the surrounding building heights, and particularly the perceived building heights of each building, was undertaken and took into account the topography of the surrounding area. So this figure shows the RLs of each building height above AHD, and then it also shows the number of stories for each building. The analysis demonstrates that there is a strong presence of high-rise towers within the locality, and additionally, the tallest perceived buildings in the locality are on the eastern extent of Rainbow Bay, and officers consider that this building height analysis demonstrates that the building provided will sit comfortably within the established high-rise character of the surrounding area. This was further reinforced through photo montages that the applicant provided from a number of viewpoints, which demonstrates that the development sits comfortably within the surrounding area. The applicant undertook public notification where 91 properly made and 81 not properly made objections were received. Where applicable, officers have taken these concerns into consideration, with a detailed response to each being provided within the officer's report. Following this assessment of the application, officers have considered that the proposal complies with the relevant provisions of the city plan, and as such, it is recommended to be approved subject to conditions. Any questions?
Councillor Young for first question.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you for the report. I did look at the map of the residents of the submitters who oppose the development. A lot of them are Brisbane. I'm just looking for the page now, sorry. And I wondered if you have an understanding of why that might be the case. Do you think that they're owners of the properties adjacent to this site?
Through the chair to the councillor, I couldn't give you a straight answer. Usually, in my experience, when people own an adjoining property, they'll put that potentially as the address, and that's usually what would get recorded. It could be the case, but usually we would see if they were an owner of a surrounding building or surrounding unit.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. And certainly I agreed with the officers initially that the building form was not up to scratch for it to receive a 50% uplift, but they certainly have improved on it. The question I have is, and I met with the adjoining neighbours who disputed that it's a four-storey, that they're in a four-storey building, they still believe it's a three. But that aside, they're really concerned about the building, the actual construction of this building due to vibration. There's been another large construction site that has experienced subsidence and caused damage to other properties. So what have we got in place in the conditions that we can help the neighbours understand that we're addressing vibration issues?
Perhaps we could have a chat about construction management plans and what's entailed in those.
Through the chair to the councillor, we do have a number of conditions. There's specifically a construction management plan condition, which is a bit broader in terms of the construction methodology. But we do also have a vibration management plan condition, which requires the applicant to provide us a vibration management plan in accordance with council's basement construction guidelines. So that broadly sets out some limits in terms of vibration to neighbouring buildings. And then also requires the applicant to undertake certain monitoring, and it essentially limits how the basement can be constructed to ensure limited disruptions to neighbouring buildings.
And that's a condition.
That's
Thank
right.
you. The other question I have, and certainly it came up when I spoke to the neighbours, is about shadowing. I do notice on page 133 the note about the slender bulk form and their tower floor plate is less than 400 square metres, and that's quite acceptable. Have you got any comment about shadowing, especially to the neighbours and the 3-storey building beside it?
Through the chair to the councillor, there's probably two things to note. The shadowing does comply with the acceptable outcomes within our General Development Provisions Code for shadowing, given that it is a relatively small floor plate, and there's no, because it's on the southwestern corner of a block, there's no properties impacted by the southern shadow, but it will still be covering the property to the east in shadow in the afternoons. But given the development is considered to comply with that acceptable outcome, it is considered to be generally what's anticipated within the high density.
And that would be a fast-moving shadow to the south?
Yeah, that's right. So that shadow analysis on the screen at the moment, so the top shadow was in the equinox period, the second shadow is in the winter period, and then the third shadow is in the summer period, and that's at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So for the majority of the year, the shadow is only going to very minorly impact that building to the east.
Yeah. And just to a little bit more comfort for the neighbours, had this building been at code height, would it have been a similar shadowing effect?
Through the chair to the councillor, it's hard to say without having a building in front of us, but it potentially would have the same impacts, and generally we ask for greater setbacks for impact accessible buildings as well, so it could have potentially been worse if reduced setbacks were proposed on a code accessible building.
Could I just check, but is my reading of what's up on the screen, is that not showing the one colour would be the code height, the darker green is the impact height? So we've actually got that presentation up here?
That's right. That's taken from just a generic shadowing standpoint and isn't taking into account a specific code.
It shows Councillor O'Neill's point that even at the code height, the shadow impact would still be the same.
Yeah. And just the other just thing that you might like to mention too, Nathan, the deep planting, I don't think that was quite, they were quite there at the original presentation, but they've certainly added to the deep planting on both sides, both Boundary Street and Ward Street, and there's a mature tree they've been conditioned to put in as well.
Through the chair to the councillor, that's correct. The applicant did have some challenges as well. They'd originally proposed, they didn't include the corner truncation originally, so part of our original information request, they needed to include that corner truncation. Sorry,
could you just say that again? I didn't hear.
The original application didn't include the corner truncation because it's on the corner of Ward Street and Boundary Street. So as part of our information request, they did lose some area that they had originally proposed for landscaping, but they had reconfigured some of the other areas to allow for it. And the setbacks of the building also allow for an actual decent-sized tree as well.
I think it's important to actually, to make sure that everybody is aware of the changes because, you've got 91 objections, even though some of them did come from Brisbane, and I'm sure they are owners of properties in that area. And Rainbow Bay is a high-density zoned area, but I can tell you with the amount of construction going on in Rainbow Bay at the moment, I'm not sure that it is high density is sustainable. But that'll be a case that
Councillor,
we'll look at for the new city plan.
Is there a question for officers? Or we're going into debate?
I'm happy with the answers. Right. Thank you.
Is there any other questions for officers? I go to Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Dora, and then Councillor Martin.
Thank you. I've raised this before on other applications. I appreciate that there's some lovely pictures now on landscaping, but I've had that before, and then when I see the ultimate delivery, it's different. So the question is, first of all, with the mature tree, to what level are we confirming what that is? I mean, if it's a palm tree, that's really probably not so brilliant. I also see in their landscaping they've got palm trees under a covered area, which doesn't make sense. So I have some in my area, and particularly in Main Beach, where we did see beautiful landscaping, and what ultimately is presented is pretty poor. It looks like someone went to Bunnings and picked something out without any experience. So I just need a little bit more confidence in that. I would appreciate more reporting coming with kind of a specific landscape design from us as well as from the applicants.
Through the chair to the councillor, I might throw over to Cam Taylor, the supervisor of landscape assessment, but broadly we do have a specific condition that conditions the statement of landscape intent that the applicant provided, and that also provides some more specifics around the actual tree species. I might throw over to Cam too for a bit of the specifics.
So we have conditioned, through you, Mr. Chair, we have conditioned certain sizes to go in. When we talk about a mature tree, we're talking about a tree that comes from a tree farm. So it won't be full size because that would limit our ability to install it, but it will be established. And I think it was a 200 to 300 litre tree, which will have a canopy of up to about 3 metres tall.
Do they confirm to you what that is?
No, we can sort that out. So we'll choose the species through the operational works landscape stage. So we get further detailed landscaping plans.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the problem, Councillor Patterson, is you're looking for a level of certainty that we don't get to OPW stage. That's why it's a landscape intent that we see, and then they lodge a future OPW where we get into the specifics of what's planted, which is where I think some of the gaps you're seeing occur.
And I'll give you an example, one on Ferry Road. We did a lot of work on the landscaping on it. There was requirement for mature trees to replace a lot of paper barks that got cut down, and the trees that were planted in the end were really not appropriate. So that's my concern. Okay, they might put something in, but how are we ensuring that this is appropriate? Same with our recent Main Beach one.
Councillor, if you have two very specific examples from that, I'd be interested maybe as an offline thing, like a response from officers on if what was approved through OPW for those two sites has been reflected in what's been delivered, and possibly if there's a gap in that needs to be acknowledged and dealt with in the future.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Patterson, you're welcome to flick us an email or pick up the phone.
And Councillor Patterson, I think that would be a very good thing because I saw the couple of examples you were talking about and would definitely agree that we seem to have a gap between the landscape intent, which is exactly what it is, it's an intent, versus what's approved for OPW. It may be as simple as that there's species that are going to take 10 years to get, but I'd like that bit of detail as well if we've got two specific examples from the councillor.
Back to questions on this application. Is that you think Cam will need to answer, Councillor Martin? Cam, we may have another question for you quickly, Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Just while we had you there, following on from Councillor Patterson, it was on page 169, so this is the conditions. My question is around landscaping, and I think it's at the bottom of that page 169 where it talks about, we've got two sort of significant trees, one on Boundary Street, one on Ward Street, and I noticed it is item 12.3. So we've got a single tree with a minimum bag size 200 litres, but then item 4 is single canopy tree 200 litres. So just wondering, obviously one is a canopy, so bigger, more established, why city officers didn't have two large canopy trees, given I think Ward Street is probably facing the retail precinct and probably more visible. Thank you.
So the difference is one is a palm?
I don't believe the conditions say that. No, it says on the conditions, one is they're both 200 litres, but one condition says a single canopy tree, whereas the other one is just 200 litres. I assume it's more of a hedged tree. So just wondering why we didn't condition, or council's condition to an established tree on, or a canopy tree on both frontages.
Yeah. Sorry.
The non-canopy tree, the example is a native hibiscus.
Yeah, so that will get up to about 3 metres, and generally it has foliage down to the ground. So it's more volume of greenery. The difference between that and a canopy tree will be, obviously, you can see the trunk on the canopy tree.
Yeah. Sorry. May I?
Happy.
So with the canopy tree, you're not talking about a palm tree for the canopy tree, are you?
No, correct.
Okay, sorry, you just confused me then. Okay, thanks. Yeah, with that, it'd just be great to have a bit more detail there because we can get a sense. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Just to close that out. So is my understanding correct in you're saying that the one that is not the canopy tree, it's more of a hedge, that would provide a better outcome from a landscaping, a softening perspective?
Yeah, it's a greater volume of greenery at a pedestrian level, whereas a canopy tree will have the canopy kind of up higher.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Doran next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to park my parking question till after in the debate, if that's okay, because I know I won't win that one. Setbacks. So setbacks don't meet AO standards, but the PO has been approved. Could you talk us through the difference between where it was on an AO versus what's actually being delivered under the plan and why that's considered okay by officers?
Through the chair to the councillor, the AO, as you know, has almost a wedding cake tier going up the building, so it changes between each level. That was one of the key points that was raised in the original information request, and as a result of that, the levels 2 to 6 have a setback of 4 metres to the outermost, and then it kind of steps in as the wall, because the wall isn't flat. And then from levels 7 to 14, 7 and above, it increases to 4.5 metres to the actual wall line. So officers considered that increase was appropriate, and we consider that's an appropriate outcome for a high-density residential zone for a building of this height.
What about on ground level?
Through the chair, I'll just go back to the ground level. They haven't proposed any actual built-to-boundary structures. There's a couple of walls there, but they're generally limited in height. So we consider it's actually a pretty good ground floor interface, given they've got no podiums. On the north, on the property on Ward Street, if I can just find that image. There we go. So to the north, it's adjacent to just the entrance driveway into that little unit complex. Mm-hmm. And then to the east, half of that is also the entry into the basement. And then for that back half, it's kind of a courtyard, rear private open space for some of those units. So we consider that was a good interface. It was pretty much going to result in just on the ground floor, a standard boundary fence to those dwellings and nothing more. And then the tower obviously set back further than that.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question as to an answer to Councillor O'Neill a few moments ago, who raised concerns over vibrations in a neighbouring property. You mentioned that the detail that provides comfort to Councillor O'Neill's question will be contained within the construction management plan. Will Councillor O'Neill be provided that plan before it's signed off by officers? Is that the normal policy that the council will be given an opportunity to consider it and weigh in and be informed before council officers approve it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, it's not the normal process, Councillor Doran. So the typical process is once the developer's appointed a builder or someone who's actually going to construct it, they would prepare that plan. It would come into officers. If a councillor had an interest, we would absolutely provide them a copy, but it's not the normal process to get a councillor to approve it before.
Also noting that CMPs are also public as well, aren't they? Don't we put them on PD Online once they're in?
No. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd have to take that one on notice just to see if they are published on PD Online. Yeah.
Just recently I did request a construction management plan. It's 450 pages long. You can access it on PD Online, but you actually have to go through a roundabout way to get it, and it is really a overriding document because some of the construction management of a construction pertains a lot of traffic management, which is an ongoing thing between, with the construction. So it's not a document that I think that neighbouring properties can really get their heads around. I mean, I'm struggling to get my head around it, and I'm looking at it quite intensely at the construction I'm talking about. So, and it's more about the traffic management side, which will be ongoing over the next couple of years. So it's a little bit difficult, but you can find it online. It's just a big document, which is it's very complex. So,
Mr. Chair, I suppose the answer, which contains tries to satisfy Councillor O'Neill's question about vibrations, how it's contained within the construction management plan, does raise an interesting point that I'd like to raise as a general business item at the end. Now that it's been discussed, in that a lot of the detail and issues that we face on the ground from construction is due to the conditions approved in the construction management plan. So if you'll permit, given it was being raised during this meeting, I'd like to raise a general business item at the end relating to consultation with the councillor before approval, because Councillor O'Neill has just mentioned that it might be searchable, but it's already approved by that point and it's too late.
So I won't accept the GBI today because I don't think you're necessarily understanding how much depth you're getting into with that one. You can circulate the GBI to councillors to consider before next committee, because in that thinking, councillors getting involved in approving OPWs, we're talking about thousands and thousands of OPWs that come through the city every year. So I'm happy for the GBI to be, which is the process, is that it should be put through the committee beforehand, and then it can be raised in the next meeting.
Unless it's raised during the meeting. The issue is raised during the meeting.
Yeah. Of which then the chair has discretion to decide if he accepts, or he or she accepts the GBI, which I won't today. That is one that can go out to committee members to consider before next meeting. Any other questions for councillors on this item? Roger, you had input?
Through you, Mr. Chair, a couple of years ago, we spent a lot of time liaising with councillors and we developed a vibration management guideline. And it's not really construction management so much in terms of your concerns that I believe it's vibration management. Condition 55 is actually vibration management plan. And what we were finding, particularly in Palm Beach, is that the construction of basements was via a thumping process, and that thumping was actually causing damage and vibration on adjoining sites. And I'm not an acoustic engineer, but the thumping was generating like noise and shock waves into adjoining properties. So this vibration management plan actually prohibits that sheet piling, that thumping construction methodology. So this condition here requires them to come up with some alternative basement construction, and that's part of the vibration management plan. So they need to provide that before they can actually start work, and that actually gives us comfort and confidence. And a lot of the historic approvals are probably what you're actually seeing, and hopefully this condition gives you some comfort that developments now will actually be subject to much more stringent vibration tests than in the past.
So just quickly, Councillor Martin, Mick, since you'll be acting between the period of this meeting and the next meeting, possibly because when we say construction management plan, that actually involves a dozen other plans, so traffic management, dewatering management, dust management, like construction management is the big overarching one. Underneath it is a couple dozen different management plans that all work together. I remember those items when they came through and when we adjusted the standard conditions. I also seem to remember with that there was some information around what is for council to regulate and what is for the state government to regulate, that it's not us that are actually the owner of a lot of those issues. So possibly, in light of Councillor Doran possibly bringing a GBI to the next meeting, maybe that information around what's actually in a construction management plan, what is the responsibility of council versus what are the responsibility of state, and what changes have been made to the standard suite of conditions recently would be good for all councillors to have beforehand. Councillor Martin, your question?
Thank you, Chair. Through you,
to Roger, just on that, particularly, it's not the operational works, but the actual potential cracking of neighbouring properties and things like that. In development approvals, is it the developer's responsibility to fund a dilapidation report for the neighbours, or whose is it the neighbours' responsibility that they would fund that bill?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't actually police that or regulate it. We basically inform the neighbour and the applicant that this is a civil issue between the two. It's not something that we actually regulate it. And you, Councillor Hamill, through you, Mr. Chair, you're probably correct. By, I suppose, getting back to you, breaking down what is relevant, what the city administers and what's not, is probably important for us to convey to you.
So my understanding is that under the planning legislation, it wouldn't actually be a legal condition for us to impose for a dilapidation report to have to be done now. They all do it because they're not interested in the case later on, but we can't necessarily put a black and white condition saying they must do it at their expense and those kind of things. But dilapidation reporting and who's responsible can be one of the items that's included in that bit of an update for everybody.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this item for officers? Very good. Do I have a mover for the officer recommendation, or anyone proposing changes to the officer recommendation? I'm happy to move the officer recommendation, seconded by Councillor Gates. I will speak to it very briefly. I am really pleased to see that when I read through the 91 submissions that were received on this application, that there is obvious evidence through the information request and the further information request of officers taking those concerns on board and then working with the applicant to make changes. And those changes are reflective not just in the renders of what the building will look like, but in a lot of other design elements as well. So I personally believe that a lot of the issues that were raised by submitters have been addressed through changes. This is the highest density zoning that we have for residential. It is where we expect a significant amount of people to live in a building. Some could argue this building probably is a little bit even undercooked for the area, that it could have taken more. What we've got, but, is something that's been designed to suit the site really well, and is a really good floor plate layout that delivers 34 dwellings into the area in a building that I personally believe, especially after the changes, is well designed. The landscaping changes are a good reflection as well. I will leave it as that for the open. Does anyone wish to speak against the item? Anyone wish to contribute at all? Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. So just in relation to the parking on this side, I acknowledge that it's AO compliant. I just would like to speak to, again, my personal view that the AO compliance measure is below what I believe it should be. And I'll just point out one very quick thing to councillors, just to reinforce that. 34 units and 48 car parks, 17 two-bedders, 16 three-bedders and 1 4-bedder. If you apply one extra car park to the 4-bedder and an extra car park to all the 3 bedrooms, that means you've got 17 two-bedroom units again with only 1 car park, and 16 three-bedroom units with only 2, and again a 4-bedroom unit with just 2. And I feel that's just going to put continuous strain out onto our streets. And I acknowledge this isn't the forum, and we're not going to change that. And I'm not voting against the particular application. I'm just noting the hope that this is considered in the new planning scheme. And that's all. Thanks.
Anyone else wish to speak? In that case, I'll close and have no need to add anything further. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimous. Officers, thank you very much. We will move to item 7.1. Now, who had questions on 7.1? Was that you, Councillor Doran? Do you think that the questions are ones that can be handled in open? It's all right. Yeah, that's fine. So you can pose the question, and if officers are not comfortable to answer in open, then we'll move to close if need be. case, Councillor Doran proposes we move to closed. I have a seconder in Councillor Martin, for the reasons being that it's negotiations relating to a commercial matter involving the local government and something along those lines. All those in favour? Against? Move to close. Live streaming off. Seconder.
I just had one question, if I might.
Oh, you would.
I'm sorry.
I don't. Councillors, we're at item 7.1. We've taken some questions and had a discussion in closed, but we're now back in open. Can I check there are no further questions that can be dealt with in open for officers? In that case, seeking a mover for the officer recommendation, which as Divisional Councillor I'm happy to do for this one. A seconder. Councillor Patterson had the hand up first. I think in the fullness, since we've pushed on in time a little bit, I'm not going to speak to this one, just to say that this is an important piece of work for the city. This is a job-creating piece of work. While disappointing that we've had to come back with this proposal because our original plan hasn't come to fruition, we hope that it hasn't cost us too much time, and we expect the state government to get on with assisting us to get this temporary local planning instrument through as quickly as possible to help support our future film precinct up in Yatala. Does anyone wish to speak against the officer recommendation? Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. So, limited into what I can talk about, but process matters to me. And in my previous life, we did a fair bit of large-scale development, and certainty before going through every gate is really important to de-risk yourself and the project. And I have not got comfort that this has been done in a proper and diligent manner, and so I can't support it today.
Anyone else wish to contribute? I don't need to close. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? Division is called. Councillor Hamill, Councillor Young, Councillor Gates, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Martin, Councillor O'Neill. Against? Let the record reflect Councillor Doran voted against the item. That's item 7.1 dealt with, councillors. The last item for the day is a general business item that was circulated to you through the agenda. So we'll move to 8.1. For way of very, very quick context for councillors of where this general business item has come from. So recently, I have had an issue in a suburb of my area where a easement that runs along the rear of a couple dozen properties, it's a stormwater easement, runs along the back of nearly 3 dozen properties. Based on some concerns raised from downhill residents about water flow during rain events, that they'd lived there for a decade and all of a sudden during a small rain event they just had an avalanche coming to their property. I raised a series of CRs for the stormwater pipe that goes to that easement to be investigated. By putting a camera up the pipe from the one end, we've been able to determine that we've got some issues in the pipe, that a part of the pipe has cracked and has let some concrete in. Thinking that because there's an easement there, local government would have the right to access through the private property to get to the easement to make the repairs. Turns out that possibly that's not the case, and we've had some problems getting access rights to that easement, which has delayed repairs. So the purpose of the GBI is allow Mr Connery and his team to investigate exactly which pieces of legislation and which acts of Parliament local governments can rely upon for access to easements to help inform future instances where this may occur. Councillor Young.
Thanks. So when you say easements, this is like a registered easement over a private property?
A registered easement along the rear of the property, but because it goes along the rear of all the properties, there's no easement to access on every single property, which we don't do. So this is a similar circumstance across thousands of properties on the Gold Coast where an easement may be along the back or along one side. Most of the time, in my experience, the private owners are more than happy for council to come onto their land and undertake repairs. It's just the first time that I've had an issue where an owner has refused access, which has meant that we have not been able to undertake those critical repairs yet. Thinking that we would be covered by legislation that would enable us to access the property, it would just appear it's not as black and white as I thought it was. And like I said, Mr Connery, through this GBI, can bring back a report of maybe there's other pieces of legislation or other acts of Parliament that do give us better powers, or maybe it's something that we need to be considering sending a letter off to a minister saying, hey, could you tighten that legislation up to give us a bit more power when it's for a critical repair that we don't need approval? Anyway, a future report will come through just to look into this a bit further and give us some advice if that's needed or not.
Thanks for the explanation. Like you said, I would have thought that a registered easement in favour of council would have given us the authority to enter a property and undertake those sorts of repairs.
Definitely gives us, to put infrastructure through there, it definitely gives us those rights. It just doesn't actually, and I have read the particulars of this easement, it doesn't reference access to it at all through the property. It just talks about access to the easement, which it would be fine, except we'd have to go through 37 fences from adjoining properties to get up to it, which is the option we're looking at, is that we may have to access this by going through everyone else's property through the rear and removing fences to get at it. It would have been, yeah. Yeah, we don't typically put access easements on every single property because that creates other issues. Anyway, future report to council to look at it. Councillor Martin, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and supportive of that. And while we're exploring the powers, I'd like to know if you think the report, just probably from my own knowledge, what that communication process is with landowners, because I've got some similar easements in my area, just around, is it 14 days? What's that communication process? And then if it's refused, what are our powers?
So I think, Councillor Martin, that's a pretty fair point. My area is not old. Like, this estate is not old. It's probably 25 years old. I guess where this really started to play in my head was thinking about the south ports of our city, that a lot of our stormwater infrastructure does run through the rear of people's properties. A lot of those assets are getting to an age where we're going to be looking to get to them in the future. So it might be timely. I think, Luke, looking at that a bit more holistically around what are the current process of when we're looking to access easements and whatnot could be part of the report. Happy with that. Councillor Gates, you want to talk about the addition?
I just wondered if you would mind, Chairman, making that a 1, and then if I can just read out a potential 2 to see whether you will be supportive of accepting that. And it's that a report be presented to the Planning and Regulation Standing Committee on the potential for council to access privately owned land for garden maintenance, where council's conditions of approval required the establishment of a boundary fence inside a private property boundary.
So I think, if you wouldn't mind, if you would take that to our support staff to get into the system, and you can quickly outline why you want to add that on.
Oh, it's in shorthand.
It's in shorthand, yeah. So, Councillor Gates, we've got your proposed addition up on the screen. I was just explaining to Councillor Young, sorry guys, we're just about done, I promise. So I was just explaining to Councillor Young that the reason why, when Councillor Gates raised this with me earlier today, while I thought this was relevant to add onto this one, is that for Mr Connery to bring back a future report, we'll have to get a fair bit of legal advice, and that this particular addition Councillor Gates is looking for, we may as well scope the request for legal advice to include it. So that's why I was looking to accept it being added on. Councillor Gates, did you want to give a bit more context to what this example is about?
Thank you, Chairman. In many instances in the north of the city on main roads, fronting main roads, there's been a rear property boundary fence that our conditions of approval have required a landscape buffer in front of the fence, but the fencing has been installed a metre into the privately owned land. So often the people in the properties, they have no access to the rear, through their rear fence boundary to get to the landscaped area for maintenance, and our officers are unable to maintain it at present because it is privately owned land. So the estates are inward facing, if you like, and the boundary fences have been put a metre inside the private property boundary, and sometimes they have to walk a kilometre, and it's just, it makes no sense. They can't possibly maintain the garden beds, and some of them are now in Division 1 along, for example, Waverley Drive, where there's a 1 metre high boulder retaining wall and then a garden bed that just is a mass of weeds, or it used to be, perhaps you fixed it. But yeah, it's just to give the officers permission on occasions where that has occurred, and our planning officers are very aware of it now because of the number of times that it's become an issue with new development in the north, and they're trying to avoid that outcome at all costs now. But it's a tricky one where we're not able to send officers onto private property, but for all intents and purposes it appears to be common property belonging to the council for maintenance.
So that's the proposed addition to the GBI, which, as the original mover of it, I'm happy to accept because I think it's an efficient use of council officer resources to investigate both at the same time. They probably won't come back in the one report. It'll probably be two separate reports, but definitely worth having a look at. A problem that we definitely do have in the north, and I think probably across other parts of the city as well, to look at.
Thanks, Chairman.
Any other further questions or concerns with the proposed GBI? In that case, we'll take a vote. All those in favour? The GBI is accepted, unanimous. Thank you for that. Councillors, it is 11:25. I'm going to call an end to today's meeting. Thank you for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.